I'm your host, Mazen, and I have with me Bhumika, Shreyans, and Shali. In this episode, we'll discuss our latest piece, Can Tata's 20-year tech pivot spin up a super app? So, Bhumika, can you get us started by telling our listeners why we chose to write about Tata this week?
Sure, Mazen. So there are many reasons why we chose to speak about Tata this week. One of them is how closely our parents' generations' lives has been impacted by the Tata Group and the multiple companies that they've set up in the 80s. Another would be how there is a 100-year-old city named after Jamshedji Tata that exists still today, and how the people are still very loyal and have a lot of gratitude for the Tata Group. And so recently, Tata's legacy goes back, but that doesn't equate to the statement that Tata is just a boring old company. Recently, Tata has, acquired 1MG. They've taken over BigBasket, and they've even invested in Cure.fit. So it was like a huge deal for us as a team to chronicle this 150-year legacy. But I think the writers have done a very good job, and we're very happy to summarize this for our audience today.
Yeah, it really is it's a fascinating story. And so, Bhumika, maybe you can get us started by telling us where the story began with Tata.
Sure, Mazen. So this story begins with Nisarwanji Tata, who chose to not buy into the familial profession of being a Parsi priest, and chose to venture out and become a businessman. And his assets under management were an export trading firm and his 5 children. So one among his children, Jamshedji Tata, joined his father's business at the age of 20 itself. So his induction took place in a very tumultuous setting for in the Indian subcontinent. So it was just 2 years after the Great Indian Revolt of 1857, and Jamshedji spent the next decade, learning the trade from his father, and he set up his own company when he turned 30 years old, using 21,000 rupees. And he had traveled the world with his father. Like, he had been to Japan, China, Europe, and the US, helping his father's trade grow. And this exercise sort of helped him figure out that there was huge opportunity in disrupting the textile business in India. And it would also sort of serve as a way to create a dent in British dominance in the subcontinent. So he brought a rundown bankrupt oil mill in Chinchpokli, which was the then industrial heart of Bombay, and he turned it into a cotton mill. And 2 years later, he sold this cotton mill for a neat profit. So this whole exercise served as a validation for his aspiration to sort of change the face of the textile business. And he took off to spend some time in England to observe the Lancashire cotton trade, and because it was a very bustling business out there. So what he figured and what he learned from there was that there were three crucial factors that would help him optimize his own cotton mill business back home. Uh, Being close to cotton growing areas, being close to railway junctions, so as to ease out distribution, and copious supplies of water and fuel to sustain the production. So after 3 years of spending time delving into all of this, on New Year's Day, 1877, Jamshedji Tata set up the Empress Mills in Nagpur, and the establishment of this mill was sort of the catalyst that birthed the three great ideas that he would pursue in realizing throughout his life. He wanted to lay the roots for an iron and steel company. He wanted to generate hydroelectric power for India, and he wanted to create a world-class educational institution, a series of them, to tutor Indians in the sciences. So even though he did not live to see much of this legacy, he was around to witness the completion of the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel, which till today, it remains an architectural marvel. This was completed back in 1903, and this sort of set a precedent for the culture of being hospitable that would become like an essence of the Tata Group. So this was also, around the time that Jamshedji's children were coming of age. Sir Dorabji Tata, who was Jamshedji's eldest son, He joined his father's business in 1904, and he also had one main mission, which was to bring his father's legacy to life. And he set up the first steel plant, Tata Iron and Steel Company, or TISCO, which is now known as Tata Steel, in 1907. And they were building a global presence from day zero. Like, that was also the same year that Tata Limited's first London office was established. And the Tata has a culture of supporting its business and people, as a lot of Tata employees have been sharing on the internet over the years. Um, so when the steel venture saw some trouble in 1924, Dorabji poured his entire personal fortune, including his wife's personal jewelry, to obtain a loan to come out of this crisis. And survive it they did, with some support secured from the likes of Mr. Nehru and Mr. Jinnah, who were, emerging leaders in the subcontinent. So 5 years after Jamshedji's death, his vision of a world-class institute was finally realized, with the establishment of IISc in 1909. And what followed this inauguration was a wave of innovation. So Dorabji set up Tata Power, India's first hydroelectric plant in Mumbai in 1910, the first cement manufacturing unit in 1912, Tata Oil Mills and Co. or Tomco in 1917, and the first indigenous insurance company, the New India Assurance Company Limited, in 1919. The same year also marked the formal establishment of the city of Jamshedpur. So, meanwhile, a Tata cousin, J.R.D. Tata, was summoned back to India by his father in 1925, and he loved to fly. And 1929, he became one of the first Indians to secure a commercial pilot's license. And as fate would have it, his first big business would be related to aviation. So there was a proposal going on for an airmail service connecting Bombay, Ahmedabad, and Karachi. And with the help of his mentor, John Patterson, he pitched this idea to Dorabji Tata, all of his ambitious goals. And this pitch resulted in the establishment of the Tata Aviation Service in 1932. So the first flight in the history of Indian aviation took off with J.R.D. Tata himself as a pilot. And like, to summarize all that had changed since the time of Jamshedji's death. In 1904, the Tata Group had owned just the Taj Mahal Hotel and 3 textile mills. And by 1930s, the Tata Group had added an integrated steel plant, electric power companies, a large edible oil and soap company, 2 cement companies, one of India's leading insurance companies, and an aviation unit to the umbrella. So the business group was burgeoning, but of course there were technological barriers they would run into, and which would produce hiccups. So speaking about airlines, there were no ground air aids or navigational or landing guides that could help pilots navigate. So despite this, Tata won the commendation of the Directorate of Civil Aviation for their punctuality. So whatever they could optimize on, they did. This was, now even after there were so many roadblocks to the aviation business that they had, JRD Tata continued to nourish Tata Airlines until when the Indian government, led by Mr. Nehru, nationalized all airports. And that was also when Air India was birthed. So it was not a decision that JRD Tata was supporting, but he nonetheless continued to serve as chairman of the national carrier. He was also particularly enthusiastic about steel. So when you look back, right, you see how much of the Tata's vision is aligned with technological development. Whatever issues they faced, they optimized on, and they believed that they had the competence to move into heavy engineering products, and this led to the establishment of Telco, which was Tata Engineering and Locomotive Company. And in 1945, with the intentions of not making just boilers or locomotives, but also road rollers, tractors, and other equipment. So they had a vision for India. Now, 1945, right, and the years to follow, this was a particularly hard time for the people in the Indian subcontinent, because the British had hurriedly drawn a border, cutting through the heart of the Indian subcontinent. And millions of people found themselves on the wrong side of the border. And Tata was also among the many losers as a result of what was one of the most heartbreaking mass migration stories in the world. The boiler making crew in the factories were majorly Pathans from the northwest who had fled India post the riots in the partition. So now there was a dearth of skilled crew members, and that left, the boiler plant paralyzed. But Tata again, they shifted their focus to locomotives. So what they did was more than 10,000 locomotives were sold to the Indian Railways. And they soon realized, though, that the Indian government could sort of choose to beat down railway prices to any level, right? So to overcome this vulnerability, Tata partnered with Daimler Benz, and they were now going to manufacture trucks. So under JRD Tata, the Tata Group also ventured into other sorts of businesses, chemicals, beverages. Like Tata Tea began in 1962 as a joint venture with James Finlay and Company. Also, this checkpoint marked the entry of Tata into the Indian household. Now it's also mind blowing to think of the range that Tata has at this point. It's only the 1960s. The Tata Institute of Fundamental Research was found by one of India's most iconic scientists, Homi Bhabha, in 1945. And the TIFR automatic calculator was India's first digital computer, which was developed in TIFR. The development began in the 1950s. It was operational by the 60s, and that made India the first country in Asia to build its own digital computers. So it is sort of incorrect for us to classify the recent set of acquisitions as Tata's foray into the digital world. They were leaders by design, and Tata Tech 1.0 was up in the 1950s. So by 1968, there was a new wave of industrialization, and Tata quickly remodeled their computer center into TCS. Yeah, yeah, I think
Just an
so. Yeah.
incredible background and just so much rich, dense history packed into the early years of laying the foundations. Thanks so much, Bhumika, for that. Shreyans, can you now tell us about the journey through the years of JRD Tata to Ratan Tata, and how did Tata, as Bhumika was referring to, uh, grow to Tech 1.0? How did they and the subsidiaries get there?
Interesting, right? So when JRD, took the post of leading Tata, it was in about 1938, which I think Bhumika had explained really well, right? He was 34 then, very new to the whole Tata group. What JRD did was emphasize on building various companies, and as Bhumika had mentioned, at that point of time, JRD had built around, Tata Group had around 14 companies, and India was still not independent. They started the Tata Motors in about 1945, but much was yet to come for the Tata Group. Right, the Tata Group was still in its early days, building whatever tech they could. Speaking of which, Tata, in the second half of the century, built their first digital computer. At that point of time, this computer, which was called as the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research and Automatic Calculator, was well ahead than any Western computer today. In with regards to that, much of the scientists that developed the computer actually would later on to go to Western universities on visiting appointments to exchange knowledge. Right. So Tata was always into this tech player. It's just that at that point of time, when all these products were being built, we were still going through this industrialization 2.0, and computers were relatively new, and Tata was one of the first to step into it. Right. So there's this new wave of industrialization taking place. Tata had just started their TCS in 1968 and had appointed FC Kohli to basically lead the group under the leadership of JRD Tata. Uh, so Tata started from scratch. They had their first acquisition was not a company, but rather was a mainframe computer in 1970. Uh, Tata would soon get the pieces together and get their first overseas contract, which was from a Middle Eastern power generation. Soon, Tata realized that they could build these services businesses along with their subsidiaries that they have, and scale the services businesses. So they hired a small team. They were a team of 6 to 7 people who started building these financial accounting and other operating softwares for customers, right? And they started selling these softwares to their other clients that they had in other businesses and paved this way of these softwares into other industries. Right. By 1976, we realized that TCS was an 8-year-old startup and had obviously had a few overseas contracts. Right. While much of this was happening in TCS, India was also kind of going through this tech shift, and there was a lot of these other companies in the same area that started off. Right. You saw HCL, Infosys, Wipro slowly coming into this IT and services industry that wanted to be like TCS, right? TCS was growing in terms of market domination at that point of time, leading the way for India in the software gig. In about 1980s, which where every other Tata business was kind of doing well. TCS was still a dark horse, and especially Tata Steel and Tata Motors were just killing it in that arena, right? But the main the point where TCS had this inflection point was when they got this 10 million deal with the Swiss Securities Clearing Corporation, SEGA, which was then the first real-time domestic and cross-border settlement system contract that they had to build, right? At that point of time, TCS actually pivoted and they said that, boss, we are here and we are here to build for the world, right? So this creation was kind of something that pivoted TCS towards building softwares for not just services industries, but services industries like manufacturing or whatever it is, but also for the core banking industries for other countries as well. Right at this point of time, when TCS was doing so well, Tata continued to form their other companies. Tata started their consumer products in 64, but soon gained a lot of market share. Tata introduced Desh Ka Namak, which was Tata Salt, in 1983, and Titan was in action in 1984. Tata Alexi, which is also another tech play by Tata, was introduced in 1989 to solve the other tech ongoing issues that were going on in the industry, right? So with an array of companies started, Tata Group, which was just a 14 company group, and when GRD had taken over, now you could see that it was 95 companies comprised by it in about 1990, taking the total market value of the group to about 5 billion USD. And at that point of time, it was probably one of the highest companies valued in the world, and it was the highest valued company in India, followed by ITC and HUL, right? So apart from this, Tata was also included in philanthropy and gave back to the society quite a lot more, right? So when you think of it, JRD didn't build companies; he actually built modern India, right? Can you pause? Can you pause it, boss? So we realized that JRD built this modern India, and Tata was leading the way for India, right? So by 1990s, if you see, India was actually going through this whole financial crisis. License Raj was collapsing. India was about to default on its external balance of payments obligations, and this whole socialist government that was against these big companies like Tata soon actually had to invite these foreign companies to come in and invest. So basically, India opened their doors for the global capital market. At that point of time, Tata was not afraid, because Tata was any which ways leading the way India was building companies, and Tata was ready to even share the seat with the foreign companies as well. But even Tata was going through a change at that point of time. And the change was basically GRD was stepping down after 52 years of leading the Tata Group. While GRD realized that he started many of these companies, both in tech as well as in heavy engineering, he had to find someone to fix fix those financial issues that these companies were going through, and that's when he was looking for someone in the company, right? He found a young and dynamic Ratan Tata, who basically just turned around the dying company, which was making the radios, which was making these radios at that point of time in Tata. And he said that Ratan, you got to leave this firm now, and I give it to your hands. At that point of time, Tata was basically a completely decentralized companies in terms of these 95 companies, and Ratan had this huge task in hand, and he was not just that in terms of the finances, but also was kind of facing these external pressures from these foreign companies that just flushed into India at that point of time. So Ratan took over. It was not an easy takeover, because a lot of these biggies that were leading these other subsidiaries in Tata were against this takeover. Soon, Ratan said that he's going to centralize the whole firm in about 1991 to 1992, and these 95 Tata companies were brought into 7 sectors. Again, was not well taken by most of the leaders in other subsidiaries, and the C. Modi, which was the best man manager of India at that point of time, who led the Tata Steel to its greater heights, realized that this control of power is not correct. But in the hindsight of it, centralization of power was what kept Tata Group innovating and took it to the next level. Right, by 1995, because of the centralization and the growing value in terms of other Tata companies, both Tata Steel and Tata Motors crossed $1 billion in market value. Well, all this was happening. TCS was slowly building its legacy in other countries. It set up its office in New York. It set up its office in much of these other cities in India, and TCS was this dark horse ready to have its best years of its life, right? At that point of time, when only 3 of these companies were actually doing exceptionally well, other Tata companies were either losing money in the market or were relatively new, if I may have to say, right? So Ratan Tata again pulled out a master stroke, and he said that if this is the case that is happening in India, and the consumer products are not moving as much, let's eye the overseas market. And at that point of time, from 2000, that started off the legacy, the reincarnation of Tata, if I may have to say. They started a lot of these acquisitions that Tata had never done in 2000 to 2010. And much of these acquisitions, actually, they bought out because they wanted to synergize their own subsidiaries and internal companies, right? At this juncture, when all this was happening, TCS, built out much more contracts. TCS started its operations in China, and in about 2004 or so, TCS was the first software company in India to cross about $1 billion in revenue. Which went public in 2004, and it was the largest IPO, raising $1.2 billion. So this strategized this whole Tata Tech 1.0, and TCS basically scaled India to global level, right, where they could build softwares for much of these foreign companies, as well as foreign government people, right? When this was all happening, 2008 financial crisis hit. 2008 financial crisis that hit was again not all that great for the Tata Group, because TCS was one among the few asset light companies, but much of it was asset heavy. Right? Tata Steel, Tata Motors, all of it was asset heavy companies. Most of the value hit, but TCS grew, right? Because of the fact that it was completely asset light, and this kind of changed the whole map of the Tata Group. And it was TCS now leading the way. Well, other companies that were started well before TCS, like Tata Steel, which started in 1907, Tata Motors in 1945, took a back seat. When this was happening at this point of time, Ratan Tata also had spent about 20 years in Tata, and he grew Tata Group's revenue to about 40x and profits to about 50x. he had centralized this whole company, and because of his one strategy that was done in about 1992, Tata's core revenues that you see, 65% of it actually came from 100 countries, because of these two strategies per se. When all this is happening, now Ratan Tata said that it is time for him to retire, and he's looking for his replacement. Right, after 2 years of search, they found a replacement again inside the firm, and it was Cyrus Mistry, who was the son of Shapurji Palonji's founder's son, and he basically had 18.3% stake in Tata Sons at that point of time. So it was a no-brainer to get him, and it looked a really good replacement at that point of time. During the transition phase, when Ratan was handing over to Cyrus Mistry, at that point of time, you realize that Tata continued to innovate. They built in a lot more companies. They got into airlines again, which was looking great for Tata at that point of time. But there was a small a slip that was taking place. There was this fallout between Cyrus and Ratan, which didn't look good, because on the media it came out only in about 2016, but 4 years it was internal to the Tata. And what happened after that was recap of what happened in 1991. Ratan Tata actually came back. Ratan Tata came back, and he said that I'm going to set things right. At that point of time, India was also going through a lot of this technological shift, and he realized that this may be the way of kind of tech 2.0, because I see a lot of these internet users maxing out, and then this mobile users as well as maxing out. At that point of time, Ratan Tata and the Tata Group started investing in much of these startups that we're seeing today, and we're using and using their products as well, right? So he ended up investing in Snapdeal, Lenskart, Cure.fit, Ola in India, and overseas he invested in Xiaomi, invested in fact even in cryptocurrency startups. Well, this was happening. He was in fact getting very old. Tata Group were looking for a replacement continuously. So they found a replacement in Chandra, who was leading TCS at that point of time. So TC and why N Chandra, that they found a leader in him, because TCS was definitely leading the way for Tata Group, and TCS's market value was about 10 times more than the next Tata company, which is Tata Steel, at that in 2018 or so, right? So N Chandra came in. TCS's TCS's revenues was 75% of Tata Group's revenue. And it was a no-brainer. This paved the way for the whole Tata Tech 2.0, and paved the way for how Tata is going to kind of reinstigate the whole tech vision that they started once in 1950.
Just an incredible story. 150 years, several generations of building what we call Tech 1.0. Thanks so much for that, Shreyans. Shelly, can you now walk us through Tata Tech 2.0, the launch of Tata Digital, Tata's ambitions, and Tata's ambitions for building a super app?
Yeah, sure, Mazen. When Tata Tech was being launched, Tata Tech 2.0, what we call it, there was a hitch. So Tata seemed to have a Walmart problem. Now, Walmart, by the virtue of being traditionally offline, did not have the data to personalize the shopper experience, unlike its competitor Amazon, which had started as an internet-first company. The same goes for Tata, right? So in 2019, N. Chandrasekaran reorganized the group companies and subsidiaries into 10 verticals like IT, travel, tourism, finance, etc. He called this strategy as a 3S strategy: simplifying, synergizing, and scaling. And Tata Digital sort of emerged as a cornerstone of this strategy. What Tata Digital aimed at was making products to enrich consumer experience, leveraging its massive distribution and its experience to serve the customers offline, due to its varied brick and mortar stores and products and services across industries. Now, they appointed Prateek Pal as the CEO, who was with TCS for almost 3 decades. He had led the digital transformation of world retail chains like Target, Walmart, etc. So it was the start of building synergies across various entities of Tata Sons. Mr. Pal had set out to build for the needs of Indian consumers and businesses. But where to start was the question. So throughout the history, if we take a step back and see the Tata's working style, so Tata's has largely been decentralized, and this decentralized ways of working were both a boon and a bane. It allowed the creation of new businesses with their leaders within the entities, but it also resulted in loose control. So this constant tension has also led to multiple reorganizations within the firm. Now, as one of the famous leaders in Tata itself said that if only Tatas knew what they knew. So, trying to sort of bridge this knowledge gap across industries, uh, they, for and also aiming towards moving to make an online platform. The easiest way to do this was to consolidate its already existing offline space in Westside, Chroma, Titan, Tanishq under one single platform. Now, bringing them together could have helped create an e-commerce platform. But even before that, in 2016, they actually launched Tata Click, where Q signifies a magnifying glass, indicating the focus on high customer value and serving only the best brands. As compared to Amazon and Flipkart, it followed a no cashback strategy from the right. But the same strategy did not help make a massive appeal to the consumers, because at that point of time, consumers were largely, even still today, they are largely focused on getting cashbacks and discounts. So fast forward to 2020, Tata Click renovated. It renovated to a direct seller model where they basically started to hold inventory instead of having a marketplace model. By using that, what they could have gotten an edge over Amazon and Flipkart was that they could reduce their logistics costs. And also, one of the things that played to their advantage was that there were no FDI regulations for e-commerce for something that was built in India as compared to the other foreign counterparts. Now, since 2016, its inception, Tata Click was getting very conservative fund infusion into it. But in 2021, ahead news of the launch of SuperApp, Tata Click got almost 20 times more fund infusion than it had got in 2019. Now, Tata Click was being positioned as an omni-channel, multi-brand retail player in India. And then we could finally say that Tata's game was getting serious in building a super app. Now, if you want to understand where the concept of super app came from, super app was not inspired from the West, but it was inspired in the neighboring country China. WeChat, which had started in 2011, had started as a messaging app, built e-commerce, logistics, payments, everything else on the app. The concept of mini programs bought more than 1,000 apps within the WeChat app. Now, what these mini programs are, these are basically the apps created by third parties within the WeChat app. In December 2020, as a stat, there were more than 1 billion users on WeChat. And currently, as of 2019, 2 years ago, there were 230 million mini programs within the app. Even Tesla has a mini program within WeChat. So then another super app that came to prominence was Gojek. Now Gojek worked because all the services it provided were sort of interlinked under one bucket of online demand location based services. So Gojek started with ride sharing, and eventually it expanded into 18 verticals like food delivery, courier services, ticket booking, all sort of relating to the main common bucket. Now, seeing this success, Indian platforms also tried. There were startups who failed, like Hike Messenger, who got acquired. Tabzo was one of the earliest super apps that was created. It was acquired by Amazon and eventually shut down. Then there are still players who are still running the game, like Flipkart, Paytm, Mall, Jio, etc. So unlike WeChat, Indian market is very open, and unlike Gojek, each vertical has diverse needs. So and also, since we are now in 2021, the customers already have specialized apps for services. So unless there are strong incentives to actually turn to a single app, the idea of a super app just might be a pipe dream and it might just fizzle out. Other factors also include like lack of unit economics, lack of market pull, and an inability to cater to all the varied needs has made building a super app really difficult. And probably that is why a lot of them have failed. But I think coming to Tata, Tata's super app was decades in the making. The reason being their whole 200-year history that we have just talked about. They have understood a variety of supply chains. They have been building software since 1970s. It was building technical progress to make everything digital. Now, massive distribution, deep expertise, technical know-how were now being bundled into a super app. Now coming to the philosophy of how do we go about building a super app. So Tata had a choice. It could either build or acquire or do both. So the philosophy of giving autonomy to its entities continued to be the theme in its recent acquisitions as well. We saw in 2021 many acquisitions like BigBasket, 1MG. Then there are talks about acquisition in buying stakes in Dunzo as well, and adding a neobank vertical to Tata Digital. But the road to digital is not going to be easy for Tata, despite all these acquisitions and the tech background. So because building a tech giant is not that easy. However, we feel that the culture of innovation and providing autonomy and a monster distribution are in Tata's pack. So these will help Tata in building those capabilities, bringing in the new talent that they have got in with Mukesh Bansal, Harish Menon, and others, which are more to come. Also, Tata has phase like Geo. Tata is also trying to get global investors for raising about $2.5 billion. It's looking at the investment as a financial investment as well as strategic. By strategic, it is trying to actually bring in more global tech companies that are so as to compete with the likes of Amazon, Flipkart. Now the story that started inadvertently in 2000s was now taking a fresh turn. I mean, nobody would have imagined that TCS would be such an important piece to Tata's digital reinvention. But now, in hindsight, it is clear that TCS will be Tata's newest expedition. The tech group that had started in 2000s has been building a lot on the SME segment of the businesses, which brings us to the second part of the super app, which is one part is consumers and the other part is the businesses that it will cater to. So after these acquisitions, I think Chandra's tech mindset will definitely be the key to super app success. And some call Tata's the salt to sea conglomerate, some call it coffee to cars conglomerate. There is no denying the fact that no other company touches these Indian consumers the way this group with over 120 billion revenue does. So I think Tata could be the platform to get an instant access to anything that they want. And in the fight for becoming this super app, Tata has all the chops to become your one-stop shop. So here's hoping for Tata's super app to be a success.
Certainly sounds like they have all the pieces that they need. Over 150 years of building Tech 1.0 and then 20 years to pivot to create this amazing platform that could become India's super app. Thanks so much, Shelly, for providing us with that amazing insight. And thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in to AJVC Unfiltered. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you next week.